started. Today we are going to learn the modern art. So after the 17th and 18th centuries art, the Baroque and the Rococo art. So the modernity in Europe and North America reflected the emergence of a new kind of society in the wake of the French, American, and industrial revolutions. Driven by technological progress and characterized by rapid change, the 19th century gave birth to our industrialized middle-class culture of mass production, mass advertising, and mass consumption, including the mass consumption of leisure activities such as shopping, going to entertainments, and visiting art museums. So the art museums themselves were a development of the 19th century, and they made art available to the public in a way we now take for granted. So this is the first national museum of art, the Louvre Museum in Paris. So from now on, art was now for everybody, no longer by the church or by the nobility, like the Renaissance or Baroque and the Rococo art. So let's see the modern art timeline here. So many scholars agree that modern art started from here, the Louvre Museum in 1793. Sorry, excuse me, let me just use the highlighter here. And it ended after World War II. So the modern art is divided as two periods: before avant-garde and after avant-garde. So we learned photography before, right? And the first photography in the world, daguerreotype, came out of the world during this modern time. So as photograph had developed, many artists abandoned the traditional art style and they tried new style of art because the traditional art was not meaningful anymore thanks to the invention of camera. So that also happened during this time period. So, but the beginning of the modern art movements were still realistic, and their art were based on the observation because the photography is just baby steps. So it wasn't that threatening for the painters that much. However, after daguerreotype, the photograph's development was accelerated, and by 1888, the Kodak invented the portable camera, and everyone could record their mundane life. So the artists of modern era needed something new rather than the realistic art. So that art movement is called avant-garde, the newest art. So the after avant-garde, the art history began to write totally different story. So now here is the avant-garde, and the before the avant-garde, there are three major art movements like realism, impressionism, post-impressionism. And after avant-garde, diverse art movements arose, like Fauvism, Expressionism, Cubism, Futurism, Dada, Surrealism, and Idealism. So, like I said, before avant-garde, the art movements are based on, the observation, like, what artists saw. And after avant-garde, artists tried to create something new style of art, like, abstract and the non-observational style of art. So today, we are going to see the art movements before the avant-garde, realism, impressionism, post-impressionism. We're going to see the rest of the art movements after the avant-garde in the next meeting. So let's see the realism first. So a number of artists broke away from the traditions of earlier 18th and 19th century art to create objective representations of the real world. The movement called realism refers specifically to writers and artists in France who were concerned about achieving social change after the revolution of 1848. So realist artists sought to depict the everyday and ordinary rather than historic, the heroic, or exotic. So their works unmasked for art viewers the true lives for the middle or lower classes. So this is a realism artist, Honor Dormier's lithographic printing work of art. We saw this work, when we learned contextual analysis before. So he recorded a historically terrible event in this work. So let me read this tragedy story again. So major French cities, including Lyon and Paris, revolted. April 15, 1834, the Parisians stand barricades in the streets. During the attack of one of the barricades by the army, Transnomian Street, an infantry captain was killed by a shot fired from a house. And the next day, the soldiers will attack very hard rioters and will break down the doors of the building at number 12 Rue Transnomian, supposed to be one from which the party was shot. So all residents of the building, including old men, women, and children, were massacred. A bloody event that will remain in history as the Massacre of Transnomian Street, imaged by the painter and caricaturist Honor Dormier. So, like this, the realist artist recorded the true story and true event and true life of the middle or lower classes. And here's another example of the realism art. So let's see this painting closer, everyone. What's the theme of this painting? What are they doing in this painting, everyone?
They are mining.
That's right, exactly. They're mining. Very good. So let's just quickly remind the art, the Renaissance and the Baroque and the Rococo art. So the previous the arts before the modern art, most of the art described like holistic stories or novels life. However, the realism artists, they describe the lower classes. So this painting, Stonebrokers, was shocking for its depiction of working class people on a large sized canvas. Look at the size. It's a huge canvas, a scale normally reserved for the heroic subject matter of history paintings. So Courbet's painting highlights the back-breaking, monotonous work of the poor. The breaking of stones was a job taught by older generations to young men, and it was a job a man would have for a lifetime. So the painting shows an older workers and his young assistants as powerful and unrelenting qualities that alarmed the upper classes. And a year before, Courbet painted this work in the revolution working conditions and to low pay. Now, let's move on to the next art movement of modern art, Impressionism. So the artists who came to be called Impressionists worked in individual, sometimes very different styles, but they were united in rejecting the formal approach of the art taught in the academy in Paris. So their art attempted not so much to portray exactly and realistically such scenes as a landscape or life in a city as to capture the light and sensation produced by the scene. The Impressionists formed a group to show their work together outside the official salon in 8 exhibitions held between 1874 and 1886. So their subject matter was scenes of everyday life. So rulers, landscapes, and life in the modern and growing cities of France. So like impresses were often intended on capturing the essence of moments in time. Before the Impressionists, artists who followed the traditional method of painting gave their work a smooth surface. On the other hand, Impressionists chose to reveal their brush stroke. So look at this painting. We can see all the brush strokes on the canvas, right? So the almost sketchy, unfinished appearance of many Impressionist works breaks away from the academic tradition of implying creating an illusion of three-dimensional space on the canvas. Instead, Impressionists flattened the space, welcomed texture created by the paint, and often allowed the canvas to be seen beneath the painting. So many Impressionist paintings do indeed have an apparently unfinished quality because the artists are interested in capturing instantaneous moments rather than creating a highly finished, technically flawless piece of work. So we are going to see 3 Impressionist artists. So this is the first Impressionist artist, Edouard Manet. Edouard Manet was a French modernist painter. He was one of the first 19th century artists to paint modern life and a pivotal figure in the transition from realism to Impressionism. So let's see his work of art together. So this is one of his famous painting. So everyone, look at this painting together. Can you guess what the intention of this work is? Can you find the artist's intention through this painting? What did he describe in this painting? Any guess? Any guess will be fine. There's no answer.
Professor, I think Well, I want to say it's maybe equality.
Um, yeah, maybe.
The act of drawing.
Act of drawing. Mhm. Can you guess the theme of this work? It's really hard to answer, right? so, so Manet's paintings are very hard to read. So let's look at this painting together. So why this different woman is naked and posed like that? And where is she looking at? So it seems like she's looking at us, right? And why these two men are dressed up and act like there are only two of them? And why this woman is, what is she doing back there? She's seems like she's taking a bath there. I don't know. So it seems like there is no relationship between these figures. So Manet's painting is odd, and art historians still debate just what he meant by it. In modeling his figures, he focused on the highest and lowest values and all but illuminating the middle transitional tones. As a result, forms such as the nude woman's body appear flattened as though illuminated by a sudden flash of light. So I'm going to share a video to see this painting closer.
We're in the Musée d'Orsay, looking at Déjeuner sur l'herbe, luncheon on the grass.
By Manet, although it didn't originally have that title. Its first title was The Bath.
And there is really neither bathing nor a luncheon going on. There is a woman in the distance, in the water. There is some fruit and a brioche, a roll in the foreground, so perhaps a remnant of a lunch, but that's not what this painting is about.
But it's very difficult to determine precisely what this painting is about, and I think that's part of the point. The painting was exhibited not at the official salon sanctioned by the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, the authority for art. Instead, this was exhibited at the Salon des Refugiés.
The Salon des Refugiés was set up by Emperor Napoleon III because so many works of art had been excluded from the official salon. But even though this painting was in the exhibition of rejected artwork, it still caused a storm of controversy based both on what was being portrayed, but also its painting technique, how it was portrayed.
These figures are clearly modern Parisian figures.
And that's the problem.
They're not set far away in ancient Greek and Roman mythology or set back in time. These are figures clearly wearing fashionable Parisian clothing, except, of course, the nude woman, which is the other part of the problem.
By placing a woman who is nude in this context, and because she's not veiled or distanced by mythology, she's not a nymph in in a classical grove. She is actually a recognizable figure. This is Manet's model, Victorine Moron. And because the two men are also recognizable figures, there is an immediacy here that creates a degree of discomfort for the viewer.
These figures don't look idealized. They don't look timeless. They look like actual people you would see on the streets of Paris. The other significant problem with these three figures is that no one seems to be truly interacting. The nude female figure looks directly out at us in a gaze that is very nonchalant and yet very direct.
Which is also breaking with tradition. In the rare instances where a nude female figure would look out toward the audience, it might be with a coy look. But here there is a figure that's returning the viewer's gaze.
And then we have the two male figures. The figure on the right gestures toward the figure in the center, but the figure in the center seems to gaze absently out of the painting and doesn't seem to return the figure on the right's gesture and conversation. And then we have this odd figure in the background who's spatially too large for where she should be in the middle ground.
There are all kinds of spatial problems here that Manet has built in. These are not happenstance, these are purposeful. For example, the woman in the background seems to reach down to scoop something out of the water, but in fact she seems to be reaching down to the thumb of the man in the foreground, collapsing the last traces of the illusion of depth.
We also have figures who are rendered very flatly. So for example, the nude female figure is not modeled with that lovely movement from light to dark that would give her a sense of three-dimensionality that is typical of representations of the female nude historically. Critics noted that she seemed to have a kind of studio lighting about her instead of the natural outdoor light of where she's located.
There is some minor modeling around the breast, under the thigh, but for the most part she looks like she's a flat cutout.
And even those shadows are very dark. There's almost a sense of her being outlined in dark grays and blacks instead of a lovely soft modeling. Overall, the handling of paint, whether we're looking at the grass in the foreground or the meadow in the distance, it's incredibly loosely brushed. There's no sense of finish. And for paintings that were approved by the jury for the Royal Academy, having a painting that was really worked on, where there was no sense left of the hand of the artist, that was the priority, and Manet is just flagrantly disregarding that. We also have a figure who seems naked and not nude, and that's because we have her discarded clothing, including her hat, in the foreground, and the fact that she's wearing a kind of ribbon. So we feel as though she's a modern Parisian woman who has discarded her clothing and not Venus, born nude naturally from the sea.
She's not an allegorical figure, she's not a mythological figure, she's somebody who has taken off her dress.
Manet is very consciously drawing on the tradition of art history here.
He understood traditional art. He had copied paintings at the Louvre.
And so this painting is based directly on at least two sources. A painting that was thought to be by Giorgione, now understood to be by Titian in the Louvre, which similarly shows two clothed male figures and two nude female figures in a beautiful landscape.
But Déjeuner sur l'Herbe is also inspired by a work by Raphael that Manet had seen through an engraved copy showing the Judgment of Paris, and in the lower right corner of that engraving were two river gods and a nymph, and it was that composition that Manet has borrowed.
So we can easily understand the reactions of the French public in 1863 when they went to the Salon des Refuses. In fact, Manet was cultivating their confusion. This refusal to tell a story is a refusal to do precisely what the Academy and especially the art-going public wanted from a painting.
Manet is teasing his viewers. He's giving all of the indications that there's a narrative and yet not including that narrative. And so the subject is then no longer what is being enacted, but rather the act of creating a work of art itself, the choices that he's making as an artist to his brushwork, to his composition.
He is making a challenge to the authorities that controlled art in France and making a strong declaration. I am the one who makes these decisions for my art.
And that forceful declaration will have a tremendous impact on the development of modernism in the late 19th century and into the 20th century.
So how is it better to understand the painting? No?
Yes.
Yeah. And we saw this painting before. We're gonna just skip this, work. So now let's move on to the second Impressionist artist, Claude Monet. Claude Monet stands like no other painter for the Impressionist style and as the French master of light. He was also a central pioneer of 20th century painting. When Monet traveled to Paris to visit the Louvre Museum in Paris, he witnessed the painters copying from the old masters. However, Monet brought his paints and other tools with him and sit by a window and paint what he saw. So Monet was in Paris for several years and met several painters who would become friends and fellow Impressionists. So one of those friends was Edward Manet. We just saw him. So this painting's title is Impression Sunrise. So which is a painting by Claude Monet and first shown at what would become known as the exhibition of the Impressionists in Paris in April 1874. The painting is credited with inspiring the name of the Impressionist movement. So Impression Sunrise depicts a port in Monet's hometown. And Monet painted the same subject in many times because the lights and the sceneries are different by the time, the day, and the weather. And he liked to paint the nature views outside to capture all the different of lighting while he was painting. And here's another beautiful landscape painting by Claude Monet. And he used brush stroke speed to show the time. So through this painting, we even could feel the windy weather through the brush strokes. Monet was diagnosed with nuclear cataracts in both eyes in 1912. At the age of 72, his visual problems began much earlier. Soon after the age of 65, he began to experience changes in his perception of color. In his eyes, everything looked blurry and yellowish and brownish to him. So after he was diagnosed cataracts, he spent most of his time at his garden. So this is one of his garden view. So he left so many beautiful garden landscape paintings and he died at 86. So I'm gonna share a video to see his beautiful garden with his wonderful paintings he left. So.
Comment je suis venu ici, c'est la destinée. C'est vrai. Je ne pensais pas m'occuper d'un jardin comme celui-ci. Monet a été une étape dans la peinture et son jardin en fait partie.
Look familiar? Welcome to the garden of none other than Claude Monet, the father of French Impressionism. Worldwide renowned painter who planted his own garden here in Giverny in 1883 and replicated it time and time again on canvases. And this is Gilbert. He's an artist in his own right. He has been responsible for the upkeep of Monet's garden for over 40 years. After the Second World War, the garden was left neglected. So in the 1970s, gardeners were called to the rescue.
Donc je suis venu travailler ici pour la restauration en 1976. Tout était mort. Donc il a fallu tout recommencer. J'avais un plan de rester 3 ou 4 ans, mais en fin de compte, j'y suis encore malgré ma retraite. Maintenant, c'est un jardin hyper connu et hyper fréquenté, plus de 600 000 visiteurs. En 6 mois, en ce moment, nous sommes 10 jardiniers à plein temps. Je suis retraité. Pour moi, c'est facile, j'habite à côté, donc de revenir dans le jardin. La journée commence à 7 h du matin pour l'été, pas l'hiver parce qu'il n'y a pas le soleil, on vit comme la lumière. On répare ce que les visiteurs ont cassé, certains partent couper les fleurs fanées, c'est très important. On fertilise, on arrose, c'est tout le travail d'un jardinier.
Gilbert wasn't the greatest connoisseur of Monet, but he got to know him through his garden.
C'est plutôt les fleurs qui m'intéressaient et petit à petit j'ai appris à découvrir Monet. Donc, et aimer. C'est très important de préserver ce jardin parce qu'il a marqué l'histoire de la peinture. Le jardin, ça a été ma destinée.
All right. Isn't it so beautiful? Let me go back to the slides. Now we'll see the third Impressionist artist, Auguste Renoir. Auguste Renoir was a French artist who was a leading painter in the development of the Impressionist style. He depicted beauty and especially feminine sensuality. And this painting is one of the Impressionism's most celebrated masterpieces. The painting depicts a typical Sunday afternoon at the original Moulin de Margaret in the district of Montmartre in Paris. In the late 19th century, working-class Parisians would dress up and spend time there dancing, drinking, and eating, just like our life. And he left so many beautiful portrait paintings like this. Look at the brush strokes on her hair depiction. It's very soft, but single strokes are alive. This is another portrait painting. So this painting is unusual portrait style. So the composition is not focusing on the figures nor the landscape. So the composition is very interesting, and even the kid doesn't show full torso in this painting. So he tried to create a unique portrait style in his painting. So Renoir showed completed technique as Impressionist through his paintings. And there is a video about his life with his masterpieces in the mood room. So please watch the video to fully understand the artist after this meeting. And now let's move on to the post-impressionist, the last art movement before the avant-garde. The next generation of artists admired many aspects of Impressionism, especially its brightened palette and direct painting technique. But they reacted in various ways to what they perceived as its shortcomings. Their styles are so highly personal that we commonly group them together under the neutral term post-impressionism. Post-impressionists, meaning simply the artist who came after Impressionism. So we are going to see three post-impressionist artists: Georges Seurat, Vincent van Gogh, and Paul Gauguin. So let's see Georges Seurat first. Georges Seurat wanted to place Impressionism's intuitive recording of optical sensations on a more scientific footing. His reading of color theories led him to develop the technique of pointillism, in which discrete dots and dashes of pure contemporary colors were supposed to blend in the viewer's eyes. So we saw his painting before. This is it. So we learned his artistic technique in visual elements chapter for the optical color mixture, right? And he painted all the colors with the color dots, but he didn't use direct colors on it. He used the optical color mixture. So for example, to make green colors, he used the yellow dots and blue dots. And when the lots of color dots put together, they create new colors to the viewer's eyes. So that was the optical color mixture. So I'm going to share a video to see how Georges Seurat created this painting.
Some say they see poetry in my paintings. I see only science.
We're in the Art Institute of Chicago, and we're looking at Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of the Grand Jatte by Georges Seurat.
And that was a quote by Seurat, whose ambition was to bring science to the methods of Impressionism.
What's interesting is that the science that he was thinking about has been, to some extent, overturned, and we're left with the poetry.
The science that he was referring to had to do with ways of making the painting seem more luminous, to seem brighter.
And I have to say, he's really succeeded. This is a painting that is brilliantly luminous and incredibly complex when it comes to color. So he's taking the earlier traditions of the Impressionists and he's imposing on them the science of vision and especially the science of color that had been developed by people like Chevreul and Rude. He was interested in this idea of dividing color into its components. That is, instead of trying to find the perfect purple, which is really hard to do.
You mean when you mix it on your palette?
Well, that's right. And the reason is that when you take, say, a blue and a red and you mix them together, that red is not pure red. It's got lots of other things in it. The blue is not pure, and when you mix them together, it gets too muddy. So how do you get a pure purple that you might see in nature? Well, Seurat's solution was to take the red, take the blue, and put them next to each other so that as your eye receives that light, the light waves do the mixing themselves.
Right, and this is called optical mixture, and this is really a change from academic technique of finding that local color of an object, mixing it on your palette and then applying it. And if you think back to the Impressionist project, that what the Impressionists sought after was to really create a sense of outdoor light. And I think using this divisionist method, this idea of optical mixture, Seurat really did that in the Grand Jatte. We have a real sense of Parisians outside on a sunny day and the real strong sense of sunlight streaming through the trees.
So clearly there is this bridge back to Impressionism, and in fact the artist used the term Neo-Impressionism when he described the kind of painting that he was doing. And yet this is also so far away from Impressionism. It's got the leisure of the Impressionist painting, it's got the outside, but this is not a painting that was painted plein air. This is not done directly before these subjects. He did do small sketches.
Actually dozens of drawings and oil sketches outside, that's right.
But then he goes back to the studio and makes this very composed, very carefully structured painting. In fact, he said that he wanted his figures to have the kind of solemnity that was found in the sculptures of the frieze of the Parthenon.
Right, so he's really wanting to bring a sense of timelessness and classicism to the art of Impressionism, and also, as you said, a sense of thoughtfulness, of composing, of not doing something spontaneous.
The figures are remarkably structured within this space, and the space itself is also remarkably organized.
And there's much more of an illusion of space than we would ever get in an Impressionist painting.
Well, almost going back to the classical tradition of landscape painting, of Claude or of Poussin, you have alternating shadow and light, which steps us back slowly into space.
And we also have a receding diagonal line that creates an illusion of space.
And yet at the same time, this is a painting, because of its technique, that really draws our eye to the surface of the canvas. So there's this really interesting tension that exists between this deep pictorial space and the very obvious, heavily worked surface. Let's go up really close and take a look. So I'm looking at the lower left corner of the painting, and I'm looking at the man who's smoking a pipe, leaning on his back. Take a close look at the way that his body is defined. You can see some of the earlier painting. I see blues, I see reds, and I see yellows, all fairly long strokes, but then I also see, painted over that, little points of color, of pinks and of blues as well, that Seurat actually added a bit later. And you can see that, especially in the shadows and the highlights at the top and the bottom, where Seurat, in a sense, creates a kind of volume.
And as we're looking at all of these different brushstrokes that are layered one on the other, I'm also noticing how the figure has really clear contours, which is something that we don't see in Impressionism. So we have a sense of line here and a form defined by line and even modeling, so the figure really seems three-dimensional. So we know that we're in the northwest of Paris, in a place that was frequented by the middle and upper classes for leisure. We know that the other side of the river was frequented more by working class figures. And so there's this question of what Seurat is saying about class and Paris in the 19th century.
And here, art historians really disagree. And it's in part because there's a lot of ambiguity. The ambiguity of class was an issue of his moment, of his time. Class was enormously important, and it had always been in French society absolutely clear. But the cities had a way now of mixing classes, and this was a modern phenomenon.
There was a way that clothing and fashion now blurred class distinctions that were more clear before. One of the things that Seurat is doing is he's confounding the expectations of a typical viewer in the end of the 19th century. So where someone would expect to see a narrative, a pretty story that was easily readable between the figures, a sense of sentiment or emotion, Seurat's not giving us that. We have figures who don't talk to each other, don't interact, we don't have a sense of a clear narrative. It just doesn't do what 19th century viewers wanted paintings to do.
And so this painting was a challenge not only for that typical viewer that you spoke of, but for the art community as well. When this painting was first exhibited in 1886, it caused a real stir, and artists divided into camps, supporting it or detracting from it.
Well, it was so different than anything anyone was doing. I mean, it exploded what the most advanced art of the time was. At that point, in 1884 to 1886, the most advanced art was an impressionist technique of open brushwork, open contours, paintings painted on site, outside, en plein air, with a sense of spontaneity, capturing outdoor light. Seurat took all that and just turned it on its head and created something really serious and monumental and classical and thoughtful, and everyone had to come to terms with it.
All right. And what's Georges Seurat, post-impressionist artist? Now let's see Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh was a Dutch post-impressionist painter who is among the most famous and influential figures in the history of Western art. In just over a decade, he created about 2,100 artworks, including around 860 oil paintings, most of which date from the last 2 years of his life. Now, I'm the artist and I do painting. That number is just, I can say, it's incredible. It's really hard to create that much, paintings in a very short time. So they include like landscape, still lifes, portraits, and self-portraits, and are characterized by bold colors and dramatic, impulsive and expressive brush stroke. That contributed to the foundation of modern art. Sadly, he was not commercially successful, and he suicided at 37, came after years of mental illness and poverty. Everyone knows this painting, The Starry Night. It is the one of the most recognized painting in the history of Western culture. It describes the view from the east-facing window of Asylum Room just before sunrise, with the addition of an ideal village. And this is his self-portrait when he had hair. And this is his bedroom painting. So there is a video about this painting in detail. So please watch the video after this meeting. And this is another his self-portrait painting after he lost his ear. He began to hallucinate and suffered attack in which he lost consciousness. During one of these attacks, he used a knife to cut his ear. He could later recall nothing about the event. And this is the last post-impressionist artist, Paul Gauguin. Paul Gauguin worked in an impressionist style early in his career. Gauguin was interested in expressing a spiritual meaning in his art. All these he sought on the sun-drenched island of the South Pacific, where he journeyed to escape what he called the disease of civilization. And this is one of his famous paintings, Tahitian. The brilliant high-key colors of his Tahitian paintings reveal his depth to Impressionism. To this lightened palette, he added his own innovations. Flattened forms and broad color areas, a strong outline, tertiary color harmonies, a taste for the exotic, an aura of mystery, and Christopher the primitive. The woman's pose is derived from Egyptian art, like the legs shown in profile and shoulders depicted frontally. Gauguin believed that European art had been enthralled for too long to the legacy of Greece and Rome, and he looked to the art of Egypt, Islam, and Asia to renew it. And there's another video to see his creative artworks based on his artistic journey of his journal. So I need you to watch this video to understand this artist's creative viewpoint. So we are going to continue to see the modern art after the avant-garde in the next meeting, and we have a discussion related to this chapter.